Perhaps our guests should learn proper reverence before cluttering God's house with their war trinkets. That is what Pastor Vincent Caldwell said 12 minutes before the entire Grace Community Church learned who Sarah Chen really was. The sanctuary smells of lemon Polish and old hymnals, light filtering through stained glass in shades of amber and blue. Sarah Chen kneels beside Marcus Webb's wheelchair during the 11 o'clock service, adjusting the thermal blanket across his paralyzed legs with movements so precise they might have been performed 1,000 times. Her hands never shake. She wears no makeup, hair pulled back tight enough to reveal the small scar visible behind her left ear, a scar shaped like a comma, the kind you get from shrapnel moving at the speed of sound. Marcus Webb is 63 years old, his body a map of wars that his mind no longer quite remembers. The paralysis came from a mortar round in Ramadi during 2007, one that took everything from his diaphragm down. He attends Grace Community every Sunday because his daughter insists, because she believes in healing through faith, because sitting in a wheelchair in a church full of standing people is easier than sitting in a wheelchair at home alone. Sarah Chen volunteers here every other week, which is to say she appears without notice, performs acts of invisible service, and vanishes before anyone thinks to ask her name. The congregation whispers when she adjusts Marcus's position. Not whispers of gratitude. Whispers like wind through a fence. She pretends not to hear. This is what she does best, making herself smaller, quieter, less present. The muscles in her jaw tighten imperceptibly, less than a millimeter of movement, the kind of tension you would only notice if you knew to look for it. Pastor Vincent Caldwell watches from the pulpit with eyes that have learned to identify disruption the way a hunter identifies movement in tall grass. He is 67, silver-haired, a man whose voice has been compared to maple syrup and authority by parishioners who measure spirituality in decibel levels. His power flows from a precise hierarchy he has spent 34 years constructing. Volunteer coordinators know their place. Ushers know theirs. Tithes flow upward. Mercy flows downward. Everyone understands the architecture. Everyone except this woman in scrubs who appears unbidden, who touches the broken without permission, who disrupts the delicate machinery of his congregation by refusing to acknowledge her place in it. Caldwell is in the middle of discussing the parable of the Good Samaritan, irony being something that has never troubled him, when Marcus Webb shifts uncomfortably in his wheelchair. The movement is small. His body is a lockbox, movement comes only in increments. But the jacket pocket where he keeps the challenge coin is loose, worn by 2 decades of nervous hands checking that the coin is still there, still real, still proof that he was once something other than a man in a chair. The coin falls. It clatters against the tile floor with a sound like a gunshot in a small space. Not loud, but absolute. The kind of sound that stops conversation the way a hand stops a clock. The sound travels across the sanctuary and lands in the silence between Caldwell's words, and he stops mid-sentence, his jaw working once as if he is chewing the interruption. Sarah reaches for the coin before Marcus can apologize. Before anyone can move. Her hand is already reaching as Caldwell's silence fills the space like water filling a cup. She moves with the terrible fluid precision of someone trained in high-consequence environments, not rushed, not frantic, but with the kind of speed that comes from a nervous system that has learned not to waste motion. The coin is heavy for its size. Tarnished silver with a Special Forces insignia, worn nearly smooth by 30 years of hands that need to know it is still there. Sarah knows this coin. She knows the weight. She knows the texture. She knows that the insignia was stamped into this metal during a time when she was a different person with a different name and a different life that the Pentagon has erased from every official record. She stands. Places the coin back into Marcus's jacket pocket with movements like folding silk. Does not look at Caldwell. Does not meet the eyes of the congregation. Her face is a portrait painted in neutrality, not blank, not emotionless, but composed in the way that soldiers learn to be composed when the world is testing them. Caldwell resumes speaking, but his tone has changed. Perhaps, he says, his voice dropping into a lower register, our guests should learn proper reverence before cluttering God's house with their war trinkets. He smiles while he says this. It is the kind of smile that a predator smiles when it senses weakness in the herd. We all appreciate charity, of course. But there is a time and place for everything. Even, he pauses, allowing his eyes to move across Sarah's frame, even for well-meaning volunteers. The congregation laughs. Not all of them. But enough. The laughter is permission, and permission is what people like Caldwell have always understood. If the authority laughs, then the thing being laughed at is acceptable prey. 7 women giggle. 14 men smile. An usher named Derek begins to nod, already preparing the words he will rehearse later. Sarah does not flinch. Does not burn red. Does not retreat. She simply stands there, watching Marcus Webb, whose eyes are fixed on the altar because looking at anything else means acknowledging what just happened. His hands are shaking. His hands shake because shame is contagious, and shame transmitted through a room travels at the speed of light. Caldwell continues the sermon, but his voice carries a new rhythm now, a new confidence. He has reclaimed his hierarchy. He has reasserted the natural order. The broken should be grateful. The volunteers should understand their place. The church should remain pure. Sarah retrieves nothing else. She straightens the blanket across Marcus's legs again, tucking it with precision against the wheelchair's frame. She does this with the hands of someone who has held pressure dressings on wounds that were trying to kill people. With the hands of someone who has performed emergency pericardiocentesis on a patient in shock, needles sliding through the pericardial sac to drain the blood that was crushing a man's heart. Her hands are steady as a surgical laser. But that is not what makes Caldwell's eyes narrow again when he glances down at her. What makes his pupils dilate, just barely, just enough, is that Sarah Chen, while straightening Marcus's blanket, looks at the tattoo on his forearm. The tattoo in military stencil font. The tattoo that reads Chen in letters 4 inches tall. Marcus does not see her looking. His eyes remain fixed on the altar, on the wooden cross, on anything except the woman kneeling beside him. But Sarah sees the tattoo. And in that moment, as her jaw tightens imperceptibly, less than a millimeter, the kind of tension that reveals everything to a person trained to read bodies the way other people read books, something shifts in her face. It lasts for 1.3 seconds. Then her composure reasserts itself, a door slamming shut, and she is the quiet nurse again, the invisible volunteer, the woman who understands her place. Caldwell watches this. He watches her recognition. He watches her control. And something in him recognizes that this woman is not what she appears to be. The recognition lasts for perhaps 2 seconds, and then Caldwell decides he does not care what she is. He has power. She is diminished. The sermon continues, and when it reaches its conclusion, Caldwell raises his hands in blessing and speaks to his congregation about the importance of maintaining proper boundaries, about how charity without order becomes chaos, about how some people, even when they volunteer, should remember to use the basement entrance, where such services are more appropriately conducted, away from the proper congregation. 3 ushers nod. Derek repeats the message to Sarah as she is leaving, his voice kind but firm, his eyes avoiding hers. Just for next time, he says. The pastor likes to keep things organized. Sarah nods. Says nothing. Collects her jacket from the back pew, where it has been resting since she arrived an hour ago. Does not look back at Marcus. Does not acknowledge the humiliation that has been performed in a language that God supposedly speaks. She simply leaves, walking through the glass doors and into the Portland morning, where the air is cold enough to make her breath visible, and somewhere in her jacket pocket she can feel the shape of her phone waiting to deliver news that will change everything. The following Sunday arrives cold and clear, the kind of Portland morning where the Willamette River throws back the sky like a mirror. Sarah pushes Marcus through the glass doors of Grace Community Church at 10:36 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before service begins. His wheelchair glides silent across the polished floor, wood that smells like linseed oil and decades of prayer. The sanctuary stretches ahead, all soaring ceilings and stained glass, 200 seats arranged in precise rows. Sarah settles Marcus in their usual spot, 3rd pew from the back, left side. She drapes his blanket across his lap, checks the wheelchair lock twice, and sits beside him with her hands folded. Marcus looks at her and smiles. She nods once, a gesture that carries the weight of everything unsaid between them. The service begins like the ones before. Dr. Vincent Caldwell ascends to the pulpit with the posture of a man who has never questioned his right to occupy high ground. His voice fills the sanctuary like humidity, pervasive, inescapable, damp. He speaks about humility and grace, about the burdens we carry and the strength we find in community. 20 rows of parishioners listen with the focused attention of people who understand that their pastor's words are not suggestions. They are metrics by which their faith will be measured. The communion plates move through the rows. Bread and wine, passed hand to hand, body and blood transformed by centuries of ritual into something that tastes like belonging. Marcus accepts the bread from an usher, a square of wheat, soft and yielding. He brings it to his lips. Chews. Swallows. For 3 seconds, nothing happens. Then his face changes color. Sarah sees it immediately. The flush from pink to red to something deeper, something wrong. Marcus's mouth opens. No sound. His hands grip the pew in front of him, knuckles white, tendons standing like cables. His chest heaves but produces no air. His diaphragm damaged in the same mortar round that took his legs, the same explosion that left him locked inside a body that no longer obeys commands, cannot clear the obstruction. The bread sits lodged in his throat, too deep for a cough that will never come. Sarah moves. She drops to her knees beside his wheelchair in one fluid motion. Her hands are already assessing his airway, tilting his head back, fingers in his mouth searching for the obstruction. It is deep. Too deep. The bread has wedged itself below the vocal cords where a normal cough could dislodge it. But Marcus cannot cough. His nervous system severed, his diaphragm paralyzed, his body a prison with no emergency exit. The sanctuary comes alive around them. Someone screams. A woman 3 rows back stands up. Caldwell's voice dies mid-sentence at the pulpit. Parishioners crane their necks, confused, unsure whether this is still part of the liturgy or whether something has ruptured in the order of things. "I need a pen," Sarah says. Her voice is level, conversational, the kind of tone someone uses to ask for the time. No one moves. The panic is spreading now, a contagion of uncertainty. A man stands. A woman clutches her daughter. Caldwell descends from the pulpit with the slow inevitability of a glacier, moving toward them but offering nothing except his presence and his confusion. Sarah reaches into Margaret Voss's purse. The usher's pocketbook sits unguarded in the pew, open like a mouth. She extracts a plastic ballpoint pen and holds it in her palm. She can feel every eye on her now, 200 sets of eyes, but she does not feel them. She feels only the geometry of Marcus's throat, the architecture of his anatomy, the precise location where air and food divide and the body decides which one lives. She disassembles the pen in 4 movements. Barrel. Ink tube. Spring. Capital. The casing remains, hollow plastic, the width of a drinking straw. "Someone call 911, she says, and someone finally moves, someone finally understands that this is real. Sarah's hands find the cricothyroid membrane, that delicate window in the throat where a practitioner can create an airway when the normal passages have closed. She palpates, feels the soft cartilage structure beneath Marcus's skin. She has done this before. Not in a church. In a compound outside Ramadi with mortar fire shredding the walls and a casualty whose windpipe had swollen shut from an IED blast. The muscle memory does not fade. The hands remember what the mind was ordered to forget. The plastic pen casing punctures through skin and membrane in a single controlled motion. Air hisses out, the beautiful, terrible sound of pressure equalizing. Sarah holds the casing in place, and Marcus gasps. His body convulses as his lungs finally receive the signal they have been screaming for. He pulls in air through the artificial airway, oxygen flowing, his face fading from purple back toward pink. The bread tumbles loose. His body shudders once, twice, and then his breathing stabilizes into something rhythmic and alive. The sanctuary is silent. Not the silence of prayer. The silence of a room witnessing something that contradicts every assumption it has made about the woman kneeling beside the paralyzed veteran. Sarah kneels motionless, one hand holding pressure on the incision, the other monitoring Marcus's neck for any sign of subcutaneous emphysema. Her breathing is steady. Her hands do not tremble. She is counting his respirations, 14 per minute, normal, oxygen saturation probably north of 94% on ambient air. She has pulled 3 people back from the edge of death in worse circumstances. She will pull this one back too. Caldwell stands frozen at the altar, the communion element still clutched in his hands. For a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 5, time moves strangely in crisis, he seems to be calculating. His brain is running the numbers. A woman who knew exactly where to cut. A woman whose hands moved with the precision of someone who has done this before. A woman who did not hesitate, did not question, did not defer to his authority or await instruction. The paramedics arrive 6 minutes later. Cedar Creek Medical is for minutes away by ambulance, but they move at the speed of emergency. Sarah briefs them with the professional efficiency of someone accustomed to reporting to command. Complete airway obstruction from food bolus. Paralyzed patient unable to cough. Emergency cricothyrotomy with improvised airway. Patient currently breathing at 14 respirations per minute, alert and oriented, vital stable. The paramedics look at each other the way trained responders do when they encounter someone who has already made the hard decisions for them. Sarah rides in the ambulance. She does not ask permission. She simply sits beside Marcus's stretcher and continues monitoring his airway while the paramedics secure a proper endotracheal tube and establish for access. Cedar Creek's ER team meets them at the ambulance bay. Dr. Okonkwo, the trauma attending, assesses the cricothyrotomy with professional respect. "You did this?" he asks, though he already knows the answer. "Yes," Sarah says. "You probably saved his life," Okonkwo says. He is already moving, already giving orders to the team, already ensuring that Marcus receives everything his body needs to continue breathing, continue living, continue existing in a world that 2 hours ago seemed determined to crush him. Sarah sits in the waiting area until the ER stabilizes Marcus and moves him to the ICU. She makes a phone call to the church, not to Caldwell, but to the main line. Someone picks up. She leaves a message. Marcus Webb was transported to Cedar Creek Medical. He's stable. He's going to be okay. She drives home as the afternoon light fractures through the clouds. Portland streets are wet from the early morning rain, and the asphalt smells like petrichor and diesel. Her phone is quiet. The world, for a moment, has stopped demanding things from her. Emma is asleep when Sarah arrives home, her 7-year-old daughter curled under a quilt with a library book splayed across her chest. Sarah carries her to bed without waking her. She sits at the kitchen table in the silence that only comes at certain hours, when the city has dimmed and the night is too young to be truly dark. She reaches into her jacket pocket and touches the shape of Marcus's challenge coin, the tarnished military medallion he had pressed into her hand outside the hospital, his way of saying thank you when his voice could not form words. She holds the coin and does not cry. She does not allow herself that surrender. But that wasn't the worst part. Because at that same moment, in his office at Grace Community Church, Pastor Vincent Caldwell was making phone calls. But that wasn't the worst part. Because at that same moment, in his office at Grace Community Church, Pastor Vincent Caldwell was making phone calls. His fingers moved across the church phone with the precision of someone who'd spent 23 years weaponizing relationships. The first call connected on the second ring. Dr. Robert Hendricks, Cedar Creek Medical's chief of staff. Also a church elder. Also someone who donated $40,000 to the building fund 3 years ago. "Bob, we had an incident," Caldwell said, his voice carrying the practiced concern of a man who'd perfected the art of poison wrapped in worry. "That nurse who volunteers here, Sarah Chen. She performed a procedure on one of our congregants. Invasive. No consent forms. No authorization from any physician. I'm concerned about liability. And whether her credentials are even current." Hendricks pulled Sarah's employee file while Caldwell held the line. Agency staff. Current CPR certification. Her nursing degree was listed as valid through 2027. Everything appeared legitimate on the surface. But Caldwell had learned long ago that surfaces were where lies lived. "I'll request a verification audit," Hendricks said. "Just to be safe. Can't be too careful these days." The second call went to City Councilman Terry Wade. Another church board member. Another man whose son had attended the youth group Caldwell ran before the scandal, quietly settled, had made certain conversations necessary. "Terry, I need a background check on someone. Routine safety matter for our volunteer program at church." Caldwell's voice carried the weight of pastoral duty, of a shepherd protecting his flock. "Sarah Chen. Just want to make sure her background is clean before we have her around vulnerable congregants." Wade agreed immediately. His office would run the check. Routine procedure. 48 hours, tops. The third call was different. This one went to a man who'd never attended Grace Community Church but who understood how to make people disappear from databases, or rather, how to discover they already had. "I need you to contact her references," Caldwell instructed. "Previous employers. Educational background. Find out if she's misrepresented anything." He paused, letting the implication hang like a held breath. "And I need it fast." The private investigator hung up and went to work. His name was Daniel Cross, and he'd spent 15 years learning that most people left trails. Digital footprints. Employment histories. Tax records. Phone numbers that could be verified. References who'd remember them. Sarah Chen left almost nothing. Her nursing license showed an issue date of 2019. Before that, the application listed employment as Department of Defense contractor. The investigator dialed the number listed. The line was disconnected. He called the Maryland Board of Nursing with a pretense and discovered her previous licensing state showed no record of her practicing there before that date. References on her Cedar Creek medical application included a Dr. Marcus Webb, the paralyzed veteran she volunteered with, and two names that turned out to be disconnected numbers and a P.O. box in Virginia that no longer existed. Sarah Chen, according to every database Cross could access, had essentially materialized into existence 5 years ago, fully formed, with credentials that technically checked out and a history that went nowhere. He called Caldwell back at 11:11 p.m. on the second day. "This woman doesn't exist before 2019. Whatever she was before that, the records have been scrubbed. Professionally. Thoroughly." Caldwell felt something shift in his chest. Not fear. Caldwell didn't feel fear anymore. But something close to it. Recognition, perhaps. The sensation of having poked at something far larger than he'd understood. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I needed to know." He called an emergency church board meeting for the following evening. 8 members sat around the oak conference table in the church office, their faces arranged in expressions of concerned piety. Caldwell had spent the intervening hours carefully constructing his narrative. Sarah Chen performed an invasive medical procedure without any documented consent, he began, projecting concern like a spotlight. "On our property. On a vulnerable congregant who cannot advocate for himself. She claims nursing credentials we cannot fully verify. Her background check has revealed serious inconsistencies. Employment history that doesn't connect to anything before 5 years ago. References that cannot be contacted." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to the register of protective alarm. "For the safety of our congregation and our legal standing, I move we issue a trespass notice, effective immediately." The board voted 8-2 to approve. Dorothy Chen, no relation, and James Holloway abstained, but their dissent mattered only in the formal record. The letter was drafted in 15 minutes, typed on church letterhead, signed by board president Michael Sterling. Caldwell drove to Sarah's rental home that evening at 6:36 p.m. The small house sat on Riverside Drive in southeast Portland, the kind of place that existed in the margins of the city, not quite poor, not quite anonymous. A single car in the driveway. Lights on in the kitchen window. He could see her moving through the space, and for a moment, something flickered across his understanding. But he pushed it down. He knocked. She opened the door within 3 seconds. Not alarmed. Not surprised. Just present, in a way that made him think of soldiers standing at attention, a readiness so complete it rendered itself invisible. "Ms. Chen," he said, extending the letter. "I take no pleasure in this. But the church must come first. This is a trespass notice, effective immediately. You're no longer welcome on church property until this matter is resolved." She took the letter without comment. Her eyes scanned it once. No trembling. No protest. No tears. Just a careful, measured acknowledgement of words that would have destroyed most people. "I understand," she said quietly, and closed the door. Caldwell stood on her porch for a moment longer, the evening cooling around him. Through the window, he could see her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in front of her on the wood surface. And in that moment, he realized he'd made a critical error. He'd assumed she would break like everyone else eventually broke. That enough pressure, enough institutional power, enough public humiliation would crack whatever she was beneath that thin, quiet surface. He'd never considered the possibility that she was already broken. That whatever was left of Sarah Chen after 5 years of erasure and reinvention was harder than anything he could pressure her with. But it was too late for that realization to matter now. What happened next didn't just end his career. It ended something larger. Something institutional. The machinery Caldwell had set in motion with his careful calls and his strategic board vote was about to meet something it wasn't designed to comprehend, a woman who'd learned long ago that some battles couldn't be won with words, and that the time for speaking quietly had passed. The trespass notice sat on the kitchen table like an indictment. Sarah Chen stared at the document, official letterhead from Grace Community Church, her name typed in a font that made the ban feel bureaucratic, final, irreversible. 7:32 p.m. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the rain starting to tap against the windows. She'd been sitting here for 43 minutes. The pen in her hand had written her name on 1,000 field reports, but she couldn't sign anything now. Couldn't acknowledge anything. The woman who existed before 2019 wasn't supposed to exist at all anymore. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen had been officially discharged, officially erased, officially dead on every database that mattered. And now Pastor Vincent Caldwell had killed her a second time with 3 sentences and an usher's committee. "Mommy." The voice came from the hallway. Small. Confused. Emma appeared in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, her 7-year-old silhouette backlit by the hallway nightlight. She'd been asleep for an hour. She wasn't supposed to wake up. Sarah's hands moved instinctively, dropping the pen, straightening the notice, pressing her palms flat against the table as if she could contain what was happening. Her jaw tightened. When she looked at her daughter, her eyes were still wet. Emma's confused expression shifted to something sharper, something a child recognized immediately. "Mommy, why are you sad?" Sarah pulled in a breath. Her hands had held Marcus Webb's neck as she pushed a pen casing through his cricothyroid membrane. Her hands had carried men through fire. Those same hands trembled slightly as she gestured Emma toward the chair beside her. Not from fear. From restraint. "Come here, baby." Emma padded across the kitchen tile, her socks whispering against the floor. She climbed into the wooden chair and looked at the trespass notice with the kind of careful attention children gave to documents they didn't understand but recognized as important. "What's that?" "It's from the church." "Oh." Emma's face brightened. "Are you helping them now?" "With the games." Sarah had to swallow. She'd volunteered at the church for 4 months. For months of quiet care for Marcus Webb, of adjusting blankets and fetching water, of being precisely the kind of invisible volunteer who existed to help. For months of being careful. For months of failing. "No, sweetie. I'm not going back there." Emma's face went still. "But you go on Thursdays." You said you help Mr. Marcus on Thursdays. You said he needs you. The words landed like shrapnel. Need. That simple word from a child's mouth carried weight it shouldn't carry. Sarah reached across the table and pulled her daughter close, her chin resting against Emma's hair. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and sleep. Normal. Safe. Everything Sarah's classified past had no right to touch. Some things change, Sarah said quietly. Did he get better? Not yet. So why can't you help him? Sarah pulled back enough to look at her daughter's face. Emma had dark eyes like her own, the same sharp line to her jaw. In 8 more years, Emma would be old enough to Google her mother's name and find nothing. Nothing. The woman who'd extracted a CIA asset from the Ramadi kill zone in 2019, who'd carried 12 wounded through enemy fire, who'd been commended by the Director of Central Intelligence, that woman had been scrubbed from the internet with surgical precision. Some people, Sarah began carefully, don't understand other people's pasts. And when they get scared or angry, they make rules about who can help and who can't. Did you do something bad? The question hit her in the sternum. Sarah's military training had prepared her for interrogation, for pain, for the sudden loss of everything. It hadn't prepared for her 7-year-old asking if her mother was a bad person. No, honey. I did everything right. A very long time ago, I did everything right. But I had to stop being that person so I could be your mommy. And some people found out about that old version of me, and they didn't like it. Emma frowned. But you're still the same person. The simplicity of it almost broke her. Sarah stood and moved to the counter where she'd left Marcus's challenge coin. She'd been carrying it since he pressed it into her palm on Sunday, his hand shaking, his voice rough with gratitude and confusion. Thank you, he'd whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As if one word repeated enough times could rebuild the neural pathways his traumatic brain injury had shattered. As if gratitude could restore memory. The coin was older than Emma. Tarnished silver with the emblem of SEAL Team 3 and a date, 2008. The year Marcus had earned it. The year Sarah had still been alive on official records. She placed it on the table in front of Emma, who picked it up carefully, turning it over. This is Mr. Marcus's, Emma said. He gave it to me. Why? Because I helped him when he was in trouble. And he wanted me to have something that meant he remembered. Even though his body makes it hard to remember things. Emma set the coin down and looked at her mother. So the church people are mad that you helped him. Sarah sat back down. The rain was falling harder now, hammering the kitchen windows like applause nobody had asked for. They're mad because I'm not supposed to exist. Not the version of me that knows how to help people in emergency situations. I'm supposed to just be a nurse. Just a regular person. But you're not regular. No. She wasn't. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen, Navy Special Warfare, had infiltrated compounds in 4 countries. Had breached doors that were supposed to be impenetrable. Had trained operators who were now training other operators. Had stood on a rooftop in Ramadi with a wounded CIA asset in her arms and talked down a Russian weapons dealer by speaking Farsi and carrying a smile like a weapon. And then she'd chosen to disappear. I'm trying to be, Sarah said. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the challenge coin again and pressed it into her mother's hand, mimicking Marcus's gesture with a child's perfect mimicry of solemnity. He gave this to you so you wouldn't forget him. You can keep remembering even if they say you can't go. Sarah's hand closed around the coin. The metal was warm from Emma's palm. Real. Tangible. The only physical evidence that the life she'd been ordered to erase had actually existed. Marcus's tattoo said Chen. This coin said SEAL Team 3. Both were proof. Both were dangerous. You're very smart, Sarah whispered. I know. Emma yawned. Can I sleep in your bed? Yeah. Come on. Sarah turned off the kitchen light. The trespass notice remained on the table, its words still visible in the darkness for just a moment before the rain and night swallowed everything. Tomorrow she would deal with what came next. Tomorrow she would figure out what a woman who didn't officially exist was supposed to do when the world discovered that she'd been living in plain sight. But tonight, she carried her daughter to bed, the tarnished coin still pressed against her palm, its weight both reassurance and countdown timer. The clock was running. She just didn't know it yet. The next Sunday arrived cold and grey, the kind of Portland morning where the sky pressed down like a hand on your chest. Sarah slipped through the back entrance of Grace Community Church at 10:16 a.m., her daughter Emma's small hand in hers. She wasn't supposed to be here. The trespass notice sat on her kitchen table at home, official letterhead, Caldwell's signature crisp and certain. But Emma had asked why Mr. Marcus didn't have anyone to help him anymore, and Sarah had made a choice that morning: some laws you break quietly, and some you break because staying away costs too much. The sanctuary smelled like old hymnals and furniture polish, a scent Sarah had learned to recognize during the week she'd volunteered. She guided Emma to the back pew, far from the sight lines of the ushers. Marcus sat in his wheelchair 3 rows forward, alone on the left side, his shoulders curved inward like a question mark. The tattoo on his forearm, Chen, was visible even from this distance, and Sarah felt the weight of it, the impossible coincidence that had brought her here in the first place. Pastor Vincent Caldwell stood at the pulpit, his voice rising with the cadence of a man basking in restored authority. True leadership, he proclaimed, his hands spread wide, is knowing when to protect your flock from corruption. To stand firm against those who would infiltrate our sacred space with false compassion. The congregation stirred, and Sarah recognized the performance. He was still talking about her, still painting her as a threat. Some of them nodded. Others kept their eyes forward, uncomfortable. The power he'd lost was returning to him in increments, restored by their complicity. That's when the man in the visitor section stood. He was Iraqi, late 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the sun. His hands trembled as he raised them, pointing directly at Sarah, and his accented English cut through the sanctuary like a blade. Al-Sadiqa al-Mustahila, he said, the words tumbling out as if they'd been waiting years to escape. The impossible friend. That is her. That is the American. The room fractured into confusion. Caldwell's voice died mid-sentence. Emma squeezed Sarah's hand, sensing the shift in pressure, the sudden weight of attention. The Iraqi man's voice strengthened. In Ramadi, 2007. The kill zone at Jolan. 12 of us were pinned. The Americans came, one woman, moving through the fire like she was already dead and had nothing left to lose. She carried my brother 6 miles through the streets. She pulled him from the rubble when the snipers had his position marked. He was crying now, the words fractured. Every resistance fighter knew that name. Al-Sadiqa al-Mustahila. When she moved, death followed anyone stupid enough to stand in her way. We whispered about her in the dark. A white-haired man in a VA medical center security uniform rose slowly from the 4th pew, his movements deliberate, ceremonial. He was in his 70s, with the bearing of someone who'd carried weight for a long time and had learned how to set it down without dropping it. That woman, he said, his voice steady but fractured at the edges, is Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen, Navy Special Warfare. 160th SAW attached to JSOC Task Force 121. He paused, gathering something from the depths of himself. She carried me 6 miles through enemy fire after I took shrapnel to the spine. 2 fragmentation wounds. I should have bled out in the Jolan district in 2007. Instead, I'm standing here. His voice cracked, actually cracked, and he didn't try to hide it. I'm alive because of her. Because she decided that a paralyzed Marine was worth dying for. The room went dead silent. 10 seconds of absolute silence, the kind where you can hear the fluorescent lights humming above, where the air itself seems to hold its breath. Caldwell's face had gone the color of old parchment. His hand gripped the pulpit edge. Marcus Webb began to weep in his wheelchair. His eyes were fixed on the tattoo on his arm, Chen, and his shoulders shook with the force of understanding, of finally connecting the invisible thread that had bound him to this quiet woman who'd sat beside him every Sunday, straightening his blanket, retrieving his fallen coin, never speaking, never demanding recognition. His hands covered his face, and the sound that came from him was the sound of someone finally allowed to remember. A Marine colonel, impeccably dressed in dress blues, stood and pulled his phone from his pocket. His voice was steady, ceremonial, the voice of someone delivering a citation. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen. 3 Navy Crosses. He let that sit for a heartbeat. 2 silver stars. Another pause, longer this time. And a classified presidential commendation. 14 years of active service, 3 combat tours, security clearance level TS/SCI. He lowered the phone. She saved more lives than this congregation will ever know. Someone's phone had captured it, all of it. Caldwell's mocking sermon from weeks earlier, his voice dripping contempt as he spoke about the war trinkets under the charity cases who cluttered God's house with their broken bodies. The laughter of the congregation following his lead. The moment he'd instructed his ushers to force her to use the basement entrance. All of it, digital and permanent, and already uploading to the internet with a video title, Pastor Mocks Navy SEAL, discovers she's his congregation's greatest hero. By Monday afternoon, the video had 847,000 views. By Tuesday morning, it was trending nationally. News vans pulled up outside Grace Community Church. Reporters called the denominational headquarters asking for statements. Someone found Caldwell's Facebook page and the comments began, thousands of them, each one a small blade. Wednesday morning, a press release arrived on the church's official email. It was from Chaplain Colonel Benjamin Morse, retired Navy, 73 years old, a man with a Silver Star and a congressional commendation of his own. Caldwell's former seminary instructor. The statement was measured, precise, devastating. I taught Vincent Caldwell for 3 years. I believed he understood service. I was wrong. His public mockery of a disabled veteran and a Navy Special Warfare Master Chief Petty Officer represents everything I spent 40 years fighting against. I formally disown him as my student and demand a full investigation into his fitness for ministry and his tenure at Grace Community Church. By Friday, denominational investigators arrived. By the following Wednesday, Caldwell was on administrative leave. By the end of the month, he was formally removed from his position. His wife filed for separation on the same day. His speaking invitations evaporated. The network of influential parishioners who'd made calls on his behalf suddenly couldn't be reached. 30 days. That's all it took to dismantle what he'd spent 15 years building. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning heavy with spring rain, Sarah walked beside Marcus down the sidewalk past Grace Community Church. His wheelchair hummed quietly, the new electric model allowing him some independence. The sanctuary had been transformed under new leadership. The pastor was a former Army chaplain, a man who understood that true service meant making room for the broken instead of excluding them. Inside the glass doors visible from the street, the Veterans Memorial Wall gleamed. Marcus's tarnished challenge coin sat in a case of honor, mounted beside photographs of congregation members who'd served. The inscription read, "Presented with gratitude to those who answered the call." Emma ran ahead toward the ice cream shop at the corner, her jacket flapping open, her hair streaming behind her. Sarah watched her go, this small human who was the reason she'd stepped away from the darkness, the reason she'd chosen a life of quiet service, the reason she'd walked back into that church on a Sunday morning despite everything. Marcus looked back at the church as they passed. "Do you think he learned anything?" His voice was steady now, stronger than it had been months ago. Physical therapy had given him some arm mobility back, and hope had given him something more. Sarah shook her head. People like that don't learn. They just build smaller kingdoms. They continued past the strip mall on the corner, past the parking lot where a folding table sat under a pop-up canopy. Vincent Caldwell was there, wearing a cheap polyester tie, a banner above him reading affordable coverage. Insurance. Supplemental policies. He was selling plans to people who didn't know his name, didn't recognize his face, didn't care about the position he'd lost. He saw them approaching and looked away quickly, his shoulders folding inward with shame. They didn't stop. Didn't speak to him. Just continued past, three people connected by a coin and a name and the strange grace that sometimes emerges when the quiet finally speak. That evening, Sarah's phone rang. It was the new pastor at Grace Community Church, inviting her to speak at a Veterans Appreciation service. She declined politely. She wasn't built for attention, wasn't shaped for the spotlight, but agreed to help organize a support network for disabled veterans in the congregation. Quiet work. Necessary work. The kind that happens when no one's watching and there's no reward except the knowledge that someone will get to keep living. She tucked Emma into bed that night, and her daughter asked a question that made her pause. "Mom, what does true class mean?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, thinking of the words the Marine Colonel had spoken to the church board, words that had echoed back to her through quiet conversations. "True class is what you do when the lights go out," she said. "When no one's watching. When there's no reward. That's when you find out who someone really is." Emma nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Sarah sat in the darkened hallway afterward, her back against the wall, and allowed herself a moment of quiet. The mission wasn't over. For someone like her, the mission never ended, but for now, it was enough to know that a paralyzed veteran had his life back, that a small girl had her mother present, that a pastor who'd ruled through shame had been unmade by the simple act of truth. The rain drummed against the windows like applause, and Sarah listened to it, steady and patient, waiting for whatever came next. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your full story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments. And if you've ever seen someone's true character revealed in a moment of crisis, share this video with someone who needs to know that quiet strength always wins in the end.